So here we are on Monday after the collapse of that building down in South Florida last week. I mean, it's one building. There are how many buildings in America? And some of them are really, really old. But, I mean, this is particularly horrific to know that a lot of the victims were probably sound asleep. I guess they woke up to the rattle of the building, and then the next thing you knew, they were crushed. I mean, I think that's what we're going to discover. Was this a bomb that went off? Nobody seems to want to talk about that. Was it a structural failure that someone knew about and then just didn't do anything about? Was it the fact that it's on the coastline? Did the ground shift and suddenly the building came down? What happened here? And honestly, this weekend, as I was going around, in the back of my mind, I walked into at least one building that was pretty old, didn't look like it had been kept up very well, to be honest with you. And I thought, who's inspected this thing? What are the standards here in Richmond? Fortunately, I don't think this kind of thing even comes close to happening here, but it's got to make you think, right? Ron Clements is one of the building inspectors in Chesterfield County. He's been at it for a while. Ron, I appreciate you coming on this morning. Do you think we have anything to worry about in Central Virginia, or are we pretty good at solving problems before they collapse on us?
Good morning, John.
Good morning.
You and the listeners of WRVA do not have anything to worry about.
Okay.
These events are tragic and horrific, but they are very rare. Mm-hmm. An enormous amount of time and effort and expertise goes into building construction, mm-hmm. both in the design, plan review, and inspections of these buildings. So, no, it's definitely a tragic event, but incredibly rare, so no.
When I look back, there's some buildings I go into, and maybe it's my own bias, but I feel like 50 years ago, 60 years ago, people were very diligent about their work. They didn't have cell phones with them. They went to work. They weren't distracted, in theory at least, not the way we're distracted today. And I also don't think that people were as concerned about creating weird-looking buildings that are all glass. And, it was just a kind of a traditional way to build buildings. And sometimes I go in modern buildings and I think, is this thing stable? It just doesn't seem to have the same structure as the old buildings. How do I put my mind at ease when I'm in one of these modern buildings?
Well, I guess what you're not seeing is behind the scenes, the amount of time, effort, and work and expertise that goes into the design. The firms designing these buildings are incredibly skilled. The codes themselves, they're incredibly robust. I teach a government citizens academy here, and one of the things I say is, most people don't probably picture what the code actually is. And I have a picture of all the books over my desk. It's 4 feet, and those are just the books that I need on a daily basis. From an inspection standpoint, it really starts with the plan review. And a huge amount of time goes into reviewing the plans for these buildings, working out the design features to make sure they're code compliant before you ever issue the permits. And then the inspection process, it's not just our inspectors who perform countless inspections throughout the course of the building construction. For commercial structures, especially these larger, taller buildings, there's a whole separate set of inspections called special inspections where an engineering firm has to be engaged to provide engineer supervised technicians out there inspecting all of the structural aspects. I mean, even down to putting torque wrenches on a certain percentage of torque of bolts to make sure they're properly torqued, testing the concrete, taking concrete cylinders back to laboratories to test. So it's a whole lot goes into making sure these buildings are safe.
And then the older buildings, like this afternoon, I'm going to be in probably one of the older buildings in downtown Richmond that's pretty tall. So I guess it was built maybe right after the turn of the century, I suppose. But it's, it's more than one. It's more than one story. Do you all go back into older buildings on a regular basis? What's the review timeline? Is it an annual thing? When I get in the elevator, I see the little sticker or the little card in the elevator that shows me when the elevator was inspected. But I don't know about the building itself.
Yeah, so numerous systems within the building have annual inspections. Like you've already mentioned, the elevator, the alarm systems, the fire sprinkler systems. Most of the life safety systems have to have annual inspections, and those reports go back to the local fire official or building official for review. We have a maintenance code in Virginia, so the code requires that you maintain your building in accordance with the code under which it was constructed. So if we do find evidence that there's a problem with an existing building, we have a code structure in place to allow us to take action to get that remediated. So again, you have nothing to fear walking into a building.
Yeah. I mean, clearly it doesn't happen very often, so I don't want to, you can't, I always say it's a country with 330 million people, 50 different states, thousands and thousands of square miles, thousands, if not millions of buildings. So one building collapsing can't send everybody into a tizzy, but you can't help but think about that. Now, here's kind of a loaded question for you. And this is being suggested down in Florida. Who knows if it's true, that perhaps complaints were sent to the inspectors in South Florida and they either ignored it or they were paid off. Gosh, I hope that's not true. Do you feel like there's quick response in Virginia to complaints? And then the loaded part of this question is, there's no culture in this society in Central Virginia that allows payoffs for that kind of thing. Would there be? I mean,
no, John, I've been in this business almost 30 years. I've never even seen or heard of a payoff. I think that's not something I believe happened in this case. Unfortunately, it takes a long time to properly analyze a building failure like this. Mm-hmm. It's going to be months, if not years, before we know exactly what happened and all of the evidence has been analyzed and the forensic analysis has been complete. And until we really get a definitive report, that's been peer reviewed and gone through the proper procedures to do a true forensic analysis, we're not going to know what happened down there. So speculating is a complete waste of time.
Yeah. Well, that's important to put it in perspective. And, it's interesting. I have a friend who was opening a restaurant here. This is probably 20 years ago. And there was something wrong with one of the steps in the back of the restaurant. Maybe it was an inch off. I don't know whether there's some standard about the height of the steps, but I remember him saying, he said to the inspector, can't you just let this slide? And I guess the inspector took it as a potential bribe or something, and it caused all kinds of trouble, which he was upset about, and I felt bad that he was in that situation. But it gave me a lot of comfort thinking, okay, well, they take this stuff seriously. They're not going to even allow you to, kind of subtly infer that there would be a payoff. So he was unhappy about it, but it made me feel good, honestly.
We have a concern handling process in Chesterfield, and I think most of the jurisdictions that I'm familiar with have similar processes in place. So if you do have a concern with the building, you let us know. We follow up with that. We have a whole group of people that's their primary focus is to follow up on building concerns. So, we take all that very seriously. We're going in these buildings, too. These are our homes. These are the businesses we go in. And all of the building safety professionals I've had the pleasure of working with over the 30 years now are the best professionals I've ever worked with. And we have a very strong state association, the Virginia Building and Code Officials Association. There's the International Code Council, which promulgates the model building codes we enforce in Virginia and adopt as part of our Virginia Building Code. And the professionalism is second to none. We're constantly getting continuing education, and the codes are constantly being evaluated and improved. We're getting ready to adopt the next edition of the Virginia Uniform Statewide Building Code July 1. That's on a 3-year cycle. So when we do learn things, these are tragic events, but we do try and learn from them. So if there's something to be gained and we can put in the code to improve it, then we do that.
Well, you've given me some confidence. I already had that, but I appreciate the validation. Ron Clements, building inspection in Chesterfield County. I appreciate it very much. Thank you, Ron.
Thank you for having me.
Yep. All right, 8:45. That makes you feel better, right?